Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ministry Matters podcast. My name is Rohan, and along with my wife, Jill, we serve as the lead pastors of a 3-small location multi-site church, C3 Camden, Picton and Thirroul in southwestern Sydney and the Illawarra. On this podcast, Jill and I discuss all matters ministry and share some of the things we've learned and are still learning along the way in our 30 plus years of pastoral ministry experience. It's our particular hope that this podcast will be of help to small church pastors and their teams and encourage you to continue to minister effectively to the wonderful people that God has entrusted into your care. The views that we express on this podcast are our own and not necessarily those of the church or denomination that we're a part of. We'd love to hear from you if you have any feedback, any comments or suggestions on any topics you'd like us to discuss in future episodes. To find out more about us or our church, check out the show notes for links to all the relevant socials and websites. So without any further ado, let's get into today's conversation.
Hello and welcome. It's great to have you with us today.
Hey, welcome everybody to another episode.
We are excited to be back with you today.
Yeah, this is like our second batch of recording. We're just starting our second batch of recording. We did a bulk over a couple of days, didn't we? The first 7 episodes, I think it was.
Yeah, and thank you for your feedback. It's been really encouraging to have some feedback. People have been saying that it's very real, which is what we want.
Yep.
And that it's relevant and it's encouraging, and so that's cool.
Yeah, keeping people inspired and keeping supporting one another. I think that's the thing in pastoral ministry and in church life. It can be challenging. It can be dangerous. So dangerous, not the wrong choice of word. I'm still getting clarity.
Dangerous.
It can be dangerous. Maybe in the United States it can be dangerous. It can be, my head is, I've had the flu. So I was only chatting with Edwina, our location pastor, this morning saying, I think I'm feeling better today. I think I've turned a corner. And then I was saying some really stupid stuff that showed my head is still brain fried. So no, pastoral ministry shouldn't be dangerous. It can be complicated. It can be challenging. It can be discouraging. I don't know how dangerous came out of discouraging, but that was the word I was looking for. But we're all in this together, and so even we're sort of hoping that even through this podcast we might be able to generate a bit of a support community where we can support one another. Especially those in pastoral ministry, small churches, we can potentially support one another, encourage one another, spur one another on to keep going, because we've had some great feedback that's been an encouragement. So thank you for those that have provided that feedback. That's been an encouragement to us. Yeah,
and I think someone said refreshing. That was the other word, which was nice. Refreshing in our realness. And that is totally the case. We are far from polished.
Yep, I would have edited out the word dangerous if I was really going to be polished, but it's still in there because I haven't bothered to edit it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's jump in. We're talking today about what are we looking for when we are looking around at raising a leader or getting someone to, trying to find someone to join our team, looking at who might be someone who we might want to have
develop,
yep. Have put into invite them to take on a new role we might be putting together. It obviously depends on the size of the church and what we're doing.
I think any church, regardless of size, should be wanting to develop new leaders and grow just through, because that's part of. I mean, we had Pastor Margaret drummed it into us that our job as pastors, as young pastors, was to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. So regardless of the size of the church, we don't hang on to everything. We should be wanting to develop leaders of all different spheres of life, ages of life, stages of life. And that's fundamental to what we're called to do, isn't it? So
that's right. I think it's definitely the case for smaller churches that we need to be a team, really. I would say, I guess what I meant when I was saying it depends on the size of the church was more if it's a if it's a larger church and you're wanting to put someone into a role, it might be where it's got a position description and requirement and expectation around it. That might be a little bit more
bit more advanced than just appointing someone.
Bit more than the starting point of that, inviting someone to be your co-leader in a connect group, but we all still need to be doing that as well.
Totally. I think that's the thing is maybe, if you're a pastor listening to this, there's hopefully our experience. You can learn from this and be encouraged that this is something you can show to your teams, because if you've got a worship team or a hosting team or a setup team or a pack-up team or a kids team, all of them should be looking at how we can bring someone along the journey with them. I was talking to our friend Pastor Turbo, what a cool name Pastor Turbo is, at C3 Bangkok that we support yesterday, and he was reminding me of how I'd shared with him, and he was referring back to how they're working very strongly on some advice I gave them when I was there in last November, and then even
we
prior to
we
COVID.
met with them, didn't we, last November when we were there, and we specifically talked to Turbo around Turbo, you can't be the pastor that does everything yourself.
Yes, that's right.
Stop having everything in your own head.
Yep.
Stop trying to be all things to all people. You've got a good team here. Give them some
and
responsibility.
shout out to Turbo, he has done that. I mean, I was there right before COVID, and that's what I challenged them. Every one of the leaders thinking about who can they have there, and over COVID, they developed a fantastic team of people. It's a small church in a predominantly Buddhist country, but they've got a good core group of people as a team shared effort now, and that's very exciting. And he was saying, he reminded me of how I'd said. And they kept talking as a team about that whole thing of who's going with you, who can you bring along, who would replace you if you weren't here tomorrow. And I think regardless of the size of the church or the stage of ministry, whether you're in your 30s or your 40s or your 50s or your 60s, none of us should be wanting to hold on to our roles. Pastor Mark Kelsey, I've heard him say, hold on to it as tightly enough to do something with it, but loosely enough to let it go when God calls you to let it go. And that requires humility and willingness to raise up and want to actually genuinely see others, whether they're younger or older, propelled off our shoulders to go further than we've ever gone. And so maybe over these next 2 or 3 episodes, we might just talk to some of that in terms of intergenerational stuff and how to raise younger people. It's different raising and equipping younger people than it is those that are middle-aged or those that are old, those that maybe even boomers and older Gen Xers and so on. So we'll deal with all of that over the next couple of episodes, won't we?
Yeah, we will. And that's right. Regarding Turbo and meeting with the team last year, it's just come back to my mind that I remember having a meal with them one night and looking around the table, and what was exciting was not just that he was able to share the load and not be the pastor doing it all himself, but there was a real buy-in from that group of people that we are all leading. We are all this is a company of people that are leading this church. They were buying into the vision. They were sharing the vision. They were front-footed together. It wasn't the pastor out there on his own trying to do it and then having, everybody else just turn up and then him trying to divvy up roles or divvy up responsibilities or tasks. He was saying to people, come on, he was inviting people to come into the dreaming stage. The
dreaming stage, there's a good key, isn't it? It's like if we're looking to refresh, maybe you're in a season where you need to re-strategize or go again after COVID and the slow burn of the last few years, finding out who have we got around us. They might not necessarily need to be super able in terms of ability, but who have we got around us who we could encourage and speak vision and inspiration and bring them into the conversation, not just pitch vision at people, but bring them into the conversation and say, let's work collaboratively together on, which is what credit to Turbo. And he told me yesterday he's been listening to this podcast. So shout out, hey Turbo.
Hey Turbo.
But that whole thing of how can we bring people into the conversation so they can be a part of the solution and being a part of solving the challenges that we face.
That's right. And when you think of Jesus and the way he worked, he engaged with the young, he engaged with the old, he engaged with rich, poor, sick, well, educated, people who were, did I say rich? Yes, rich.
Yep,
people
rich.
who were on the fringes
who were
of
politically
society,
left, politically right.
People who were from all different perspectives. Yep. And I really love that diversity that we see right through the Bible and we see through the Gospels in the early church. And I think that sometimes we think of, who am I taking with me? Who am I looking for as the person to get to start to dream, to start to share responsibility, to start to, that might have a heart, that might have a sense that God is drawing them to or calling them to step out into another area and to, that might have an openness for ministry. And I think sometimes we've thought and it does sometimes default back to what's most convenient.
Yes.
And we can tend to ask people who are similar to us. So we can tend to gravitate towards maybe our friends or people who are like us, people who look like us, sound like us, who we relate to, and just say, hey, can I get you to do this? And that's probably normal and okay. I think we have to be to a point, but I think we have to be quite intentional about looking beyond that. Otherwise, we're not going to have a church that reflects the heart of God, which is the church that is diverse.
That's right.
Where we have different ethnicities, where we have different people of different ability.
Yeah, different ability, different generations.
Different socioeconomic backgrounds, all of that which represent the gospel. Now, I get even like what you mentioned just then about Turbo. Well, their context is they meet. Their church runs in a cafe on a university campus. So they, mostly their congregation is going to be made up of university students. So that is a niche. That's their context. And some of us may have contexts that are quite specific to
if you're pastoring in a small country town, there's going to be a different demographic and context there, and you can bring that in. But as long as we are constantly thinking about how do we work with people who are different to us, because whether it's in a country town or in an urban, there's always going to be different people groups and different worldviews and different perspectives and different levels of socioeconomic income and all those things. And so if we're just keeping that front and center, otherwise we'll end up with a church that's all the same. And there used to be a big school of thought around this. Oh, yeah, that works best if you just keep one niche. Problem is, it may work best in terms of being able to just make everything smoother, but it doesn't represent the heart of God. The Apostle Paul's vision was for diversity with unity, was that people from every race and tribe and tongue, as it says in Revelation, people, Gentile, Jew, slave, free, male, female, all of that would be one in Christ. And so we need to be going in that direction of who's different from me, who might require some work on my part, but who could I invite into a conversation? Who could I invite into a role and give them a perspective? And it just makes some of the churches I know that have done that incredibly well are some of the fastest growing churches, because now they're opening themselves up to more people groups that they can reach.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So what are we looking for? Say if we're thinking about engaging with the younger generation, we're thinking about looking at the younger generation or wanting to have younger generation, we're in our 50s now. So younger generation, I mean, like anything through from, I guess,
late teens to mid-30s sort of thing?
Mid-30s. What would we be looking at if we wanted to have more young people, have more of that younger generation involved? We might look around us, like you say. It might be a time for a bit of a review, a bit of a let's take stock of where we're at. Go, well, where are the gaps? What do we need? Where are we not seeing representation in our church? Where do we want to? What do we want in that? Partly it is about your vision as well. It's about where you're placed, like we just talked about. I think just another thought that came to mind. I was on a Zoom last week, which was with some people mainly in America actually, and it was about the microchurch model. And I was just interested in learning a little bit more about that. So I jumped onto that Zoom. It was like 8 a.m. here, which was like evening in Central America, and there's only about 40 people on the Zoom call.
Central America, she means Chicago time, not Central America as in Guatemala.
No, Central United States, sorry. Yeah. And it was interesting hearing, they're talking about microchurch, which, some of you guys might be a part of, and that in that structure,
yep.
I guess we'll use, it might be that your group totally is around families, and this is a little bit different again.
Yes, that's different because that becomes more.
Or it might be it's around a prison ministry, and you're probably not going to have kids involved if you're around a prison ministry. Or it might be that you're going out, and some of them were talked about being in a tattoo parlor. Mm-hmm. So that just throwing this in, that depending on your context, we're talking really about being church. We have 3 locations.
That are suburban churches, yes.
We're in a rural community,
semi-rural community, and 2 suburban.
And 2 of our other locations are in the suburbs. So I guess, people might say, well, this is a little bit different for me because I generally, you might have a focus on young families because you run families programs, etc. So that's another. We don't want to sort of
not a one size fits all.
Smother people's enthusiasm for a certain area that they want to be in and say, well, you have to have it all. But we think across what we've seen that we would love to see more younger people involved, more diversity across who we're looking for. And things like, it might be, we sometimes, I think, discount people. We might look at the younger generation and think, oh, they don't look like they're interested, or they're busy at uni, or they're busy with sport, or they don't have much money, or, we might look at then families and think, well, they're busy with kids and they're busy. And it's like we can sometimes as leaders, I think, discount everyone because we just think everyone's busy, busy, busy. But I think we need to kind of come at this from a little bit of a visionary perspective and a bit of a faith perspective and go, well, you know what? God called me, God called us, and it might not be the most convenient. Maybe there won't be necessarily, people will have time limitations, they will have capacity limitations, but that doesn't mean that God won't have them make space for that. I think we have to choose to believe that.
That's great.
That's right. That's what's happened right through history. When
That's right.
God's called
it's
people.
never always been, there's never really been convenient times. And when churches have been in convenient situations is usually when they suffer. They don't flourish. They flourish when it's inconvenient, when it's challenging. Yeah, I think, in light of what you're saying there, I think it's important that we do help to pitch to people the why, not just the what. Reflecting on, I think this podcast probably the way time's going will focus largely on younger generation. Maybe we can pick up some of the other areas of diversity, older generation and, different ethnicities or different socioeconomic area maybe in the next episode or something. But, I think what I've had to come to realise is that reaching a younger generation, reaching the younger millennials and the Gen Zs requires, or the Gen Zs, I should say, for those that want to be traditional Australians and Canadians, it's just become Americanized there, but I think that's what they say, Gen Z. Even ABC says you can say Z or Z now. It says on the end of the song. So they've obviously, kids songs on Play School says X, Y, Z or Z.
You've
They
been
say
watching
Z or
Play
Z.
School to learn all your political correctness.
Political correctness with the young kids. Yeah. So, so regardless of whether we're talking about, when we're talking about younger millennial age groups, so let's say, sub 30, low 30s and down, the way if you're looking as maybe a Gen Xer like we are or an older millennial, largely the way to reach that younger generation has changed. The way to invite them into ministry has changed. I've listened to so many podcasts. It's a very big popular thing at the moment. Just yesterday I was listening to Preston Sprinkle interviewing the head of the Barna Institute, David Kinnaman, fantastic thinker. And he was specifically saying just this, that what appealed to Gen Xers and older millennials does not actually work. In fact, it can be counterproductive in terms of appealing to younger millennials and Gen Z and Gen Zs. And, we've seen this even with our oldest daughter being 30 and our youngest son being 21. That 10-year break has changed society in so many ways. And so David Kinnaman was saying that, it used to be that there was, even in smaller churches, there were people out there you could go to us when we were young Gen Xers, and even, maybe even our 30-year-old daughter, Amy, at that age too, there was probably a culture of you just invite them into leadership, and leadership and influence was something to aspire to. And so you just had to ask them, and that had some wonderful benefits in that it was easier to find people to run teams and lead and develop and be discipled. That's the strength of it. There was more people around. I think what we've seen is the downside of that has been that probably where it was unhealthy in times, it became like something to aspire to that maybe measured your success by that. Oh, I've preached in youth, or I've done this. I'm that kind of leader. And then that led to maybe people becoming a bit arrogant or becoming disheartened and thinking they've arrived, and then suddenly finding life's hard.
Yeah, maybe a bit ambition based and people looking at the charisma and looking at the coolness of it and the lights and the smoke and all the coolness that seemed around some of the leaders that were in front of them, and it was almost like a wait list to get into the leadership
That's
team,
right,
because and if you were selected, you were really
somehow arrived.
You'd arrived, and that's just not the case so much from what we see and hear.
Not what we see and hear. And that's specifically what David Kinnaman said. He said, in fact, that's the opposite. With the younger millennials and especially the Gen Zs, it's actually the opposite now. There's less of them willing to go into leadership. We're seeing this with younger generation in terms of church pastors. I mean, there's less people wanting to take in pastoral ministry. Excuse me. So with that in mind, I think the way to appeal to the younger generation and ask them, because the cause is still the same, the mission of church hasn't changed, But we need to be culturally aware that maybe what appealed to us as Gen Xers that got us involved actually could be counterproductive when it comes to asking those younger people in your congregation to be involved. They're almost pushing back against that because the fame, the so-called fame or the influence or the success, that's not appealing. A younger generation are looking for authenticity, was the word that he used. They're looking to see if you're the real deal. They're not interested in all the fluff.
No.
The younger generation are looking for authenticity. So the way to invite a younger generation or person into a position of influence or into a position of discipleship and speaking that over them has to be different. And what's required of us as leaders who are X's and older millennials and so on, even boomers, will be different. It will require us to think differently and act differently and invest at a higher level maybe before we see some of the results in terms of the willingness to buy into leadership that maybe we would have seen from our generation.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing that comes to my mind is do you think that we didn't talk enough about counting the cost and discipleship, and we made entry level to these things seem very appealing to leadership, seem appealing and seem something to be sought after and something to, that we had esteem for.
Whether it was intentional or not, I think it was happening.
And then people would realise, there's a narrow road here.
This is flipping hard work.
The Bible talks about the narrow road, and the reality is we have to be able to lead ourselves, and we have to be able to be to grow and be discipled.
And not everyone's going to love every sermon you preach or every time you lead a team. You're going to have people who disagree with you. And when there was a unhealthy sense of pride or arrogance, that tended just to shut people down, which probably fed the culture of disillusionment that we're now living out of, is that we've got to make up some ground that we've lost.
Well, now we know we have to be prepared to work on our own character. Somehow that maybe was overlooked there for a period of time, and we just assumed that would happen by default, but we actually have to be intentional and work on it.
And these are generalisations, but I think I'm not saying there isn't individual churches or individual people that did it well, but I think as a generalisation it was probably a culture within the church and within the church subculture that wasn't necessarily as healthy as we perhaps thought it could have been. And oftentimes what a lot of churches and feedback we've seen is that people became youth leaders and then they got married and had kids and suddenly realised that life was going to take more out of them than they thought, and a lot of them got disillusioned, and then they were sort of oftentimes churches would go, well, there's no space for you anymore because you don't have availability time you used to have. So that leads to a falling away, and even probably as some degrees led to degrees of deconstruction among the millennials. So we want to reach those people, those young millennials, those Gen Zs. So what do we have to do to invite them into the conversation? What's some practicals that we can do?
I think developing relationship with them, showing interest in them. I would say
the slow burn, like taking time on that.
Yeah, it's just it is a slow burn. I think it could be that we intentionally set up a meeting, invite them in, and have a lunch or have a coffee or do something around bringing them together with us, letting them know we're interested in their in hearing from them and interested in hearing their perspectives on things and interested in knowing them. And I think, this just comes to mind that they would probably really like that. But I think, it's being intentional about that and getting to know their names, getting to know what they're about, I think.
I think I'd add to that the younger generation, it's the whole authenticity thing. I think the younger generation want to know that we're interested in. I've heard this conversation a few times on Kerry Newhoff over the years. The younger generation want a seat at the table. Maybe our generation, we kind of came to the table thinking, well, we're just going to learn from the older generation. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't want to comment on it, but the fact is younger generation have been used to having voice. And there's probably some downsides to that, but I think there's some strengths to that too, that actually inviting them into the conversation, not just downloading information, but saying, hey, we value your input. We would love to hear your thoughts on what the church needs to do differently. What could this department do? How could our Connect group do it differently to be more applicable? I think most young people probably are interested in that kind of conversation and being engaged in that.
Yeah, and it's true. I really do want to know what they think.
Absolutely.
If we're organising something, we've got a women's event coming up soon, and I know that we have to be intentional. We have to be intentional if we want the younger generation involved. And talking to them about things like saying, what would you do what would you do for this? So what do you think? What would you be interested in? I didn't just make a decision based on just a few people who were like me. Well, and I'm not saying I'm perfect at this. I probably could have done it better. But I think, we hear this all the time in the community sector about, I know we've got to be mindful of it. We're not a committee in the church. We are we are vision directed. But it is good to be consultative.
Yeah, consultative, yeah.
And and they love it when you go, what would you think if we had this happen, or if we had this kind of thing, or do you think this is a bit old hat? What's your perspective? Because we love something to feel fresh and something to have enthusiasm, and that's what the younger generation brings. It brings life. It brings vibrancy. It's I know there's atmosphere, I think, that they bring, and we want that. So I want that. So if I have to overcome my own, tendencies to do things a certain way and push through that and go, well, what? I'm going to invite them to the table, but then I have to let everybody else around the table know, what? Let's not shut them down, and let's include them, and let's not, because they're not going to want to come back to the table for a second time if they don't feel like anyone listened to them or heard them, or. We just talked recently about even our board, our church board, and about inviting, having more diversity. We've been talking about this for a while with our church board and our charity board, and we are bringing on more, people with different perspectives, because we want to have that. We want to hear that. We're here in child protection in Australia about the 10 national principles, and one of the national principles, and I was segue slightly. It's the
same principle, though.
But they talk about it.
Hearing from the
if you
child.
want this to be, that's another one. But I was going to say, if you want something embedded in culture, this is what they talk about. This is a national principles for child safety. If you want this to be embedded in culture, it has to be at all levels of the organisation. So we can't just say we want to embed having a value for young people in our culture.
If it's all being driven by middle-aged white men.
But then only have it at one level. We have to embed that in all of our conversations, in all of our culture, from our board meetings to our team meetings to our staff, to our what we talk about at the front of the church, to messaging in our advertising and our promo. We have to be thinking about including those kind of things in embedding it in culture so that it comes out. Because, otherwise we get someone who gets up and gives an announcement and totally shuts down, what
the
we
young
just
people
said.
or whatever. Yeah, exactly.
Or says, the young people always do that. It's like, oh, no, they've just totally, closed down what we've been working towards. So we have to kind of, embed that in culture. But, you're right. Another of the 10 principles is hear from the people, hear from young people.
Yes.
Ask them what they want. Ask them, how can we do this better?
So that's interesting. So if we're trying to raise new people, it's like, let's say, let's hypothetically, heading up a setup team, and I want to get some young people on the setup team. As a Gen Xer, it's not just, hey, I need you on the team and expect them to be involved. It's actually going, there's explaining the why, but actually inviting them to the table, maybe shouting them some pizza and saying, hey, can we have a conversation about this? How could we do this better? How do you think? You look around. How do you think you could potentially get your friends involved? So we're hearing from that and being willing to accept that, even if it seems foreign to us or it might not work. Been having some conversations lately just around the way young people communicate on socials, and understanding that, if you invite young people to something, they'll be very slow to say they won't come. They just won't come because they're afraid to reach out and put their head out in the chopping block and say,
look like they're the only one.
The only one. So they're just things that are just require a lot of work on our part to think about it. But if we are going to reach a younger generation of people and invite them into teams, then we need to do that. And it is in small churches. One of the biggest challenges in our churches and in many of the churches I speak to, smaller churches and even mid-sized churches today, is it's hard to get young people and youth ministries and young adults ministries happening without that, without a groundswell of young people, because they're looking for community. And so you need to kind of find the one or two and invite them and say, I know it's hard right now, and I know it's probably easier to go to another church that's got a vibrant youth ministry or got a vibrant young adults ministry. I don't want to discourage that, but find and pray and say, invite them into the conversation, and rather than just saying, we want you to run young adults, say, how can we help you? How could we inspire you? What could you do? What would you do to get more young adults along? And so then you're enabling those younger leaders to start to think about it and giving them permission, that's got to be counteracted by discipleship, hasn't it? There has to be a two-way street. Why don't we, just before we finish off, why don't we talk about some of those values around discipleship of young people and teachability of young people, so that they don't just, we don't want to fall into that trap we had maybe 15 years ago where the young people, many times young people didn't, the older people had anything to offer. Oh, they're just outdated and they're outmoded. I don't think that's where most young people are at today. I think most people, young people, from what I could see, are interested in listening to Gen Xers if they value and trust that they're authentic. So how can we turn it around so we hear from people, but we also encourage young people to hear from us and learn from us?
Yeah, well, I guess as we're doing that walk with them, some of the things that come to mind would be, around humility, and maybe it's not, again, maybe it's not as much of an issue in this generation as it maybe it was before, but there has to be a humility, I think, about them, or
a teachability,
and I think we would want them, we would want to be able to see growing in them a genuine concern and love and care for people. And even if they might be an introvert, they might be really quiet. A lot of people are, a lot of young people are, a lot of people are. It's, not everyone is a charismatic, choleric, outward type person. And I think we learned a lot more about that in recent decade or so as well, about the whole thing of quiet and how that quiet people are, if you look through scripture, you can see different temperament types. It's not all what we thought it was. But yeah, I'd say they have to be open to our direction, and because they will need a lot of guidance. Anyone young learning, we need a lot of guidance. We needed direction. But I think partnering that with hearing from them, being interested in them.
Okay, so let's talk about, maybe as we wrap this one up then, let's say as a leader, maybe you're a Gen X or an older millennial and you're looking for someone, you see one or two younger, maybe young Gen Zs, maybe in their late teens, early 20s, and you think, I think I can work with them. I think there's something on their life. I think there's a call of God for some area of Christian ministry on their life. Can we approach them? So what I'd be thinking is I'd love to approach them and just say and speak that and prophesy that over. And Pastor Phil always says, got to see in people more than they can see in themselves.
Yeah.
Prophesy. So I see this in you. I'm thinking about one young guy that I've been doing this with. I see this in you. I see the potential for you down the track. I'm not sure if that's what you want, but it could be. And I'd love to hear from you, but at the same time as hearing from you, I'd also love to take the time to invest into you. Would you be open to, me starting to direct you and encourage you in areas of your life? So it becomes a genuine relationship, a two-way thing where I can hear from people who I'm discipling, but also there's an expectation. I'm looking for a willingness that they're prepared to be humble enough and teachable enough to go, well, Rowan's got a few runs on the board. Let's learn from Rowan as well.
Yeah.
It's very hard to lead people who think they know everything, isn't it?
Yeah, and one of the things that just comes to mind in that is it's challenging to have to do that, what you're saying, with someone who isn't in a role or isn't doing something.
Well, they need to be in a task to do it.
Yeah, I can't think who said this before. It just came to mind that I've heard someone talk about this. It might be Pastor Phil as well. That unless someone's when someone's doing something, you can then say, well, how was that? What did you think? What feedback would you give on, say if they're doing greeting and, you'll say, okay, well, you're running the greeting team. Well, you want to talk to them afterwards and say, talk to them beforehand and give them the briefing of what it's about. And then you want to be able to talk to them afterwards. So a brief and a debrief afterwards, and then say, how did you think you went? And then for there to be able to be that openness of, well, for them to take your feedback of, well, maybe you could smile a little bit more. But you're saying that from the perspective of
I believe in you.
I believe in you, and I'm going to walk with you, and this is great. It's really great to have you on the team. Something else, just back to what we were talking about earlier as well, was that I think when you're talking about set up team or whatever, and maybe grab a pizza together, I think having that little mini sense of community is great. And I think some of our most successful teams are where you see a community in the community.
Yes.
Where you see, they have got each other's backs. And because there will be some times when people are going through challenging things and they might not be able to turn up that week. But if they know, I'm not being discounted and I'm not being judged because I didn't turn up because I've got a genuine reason, and you've got a sense of team there, that makes all the difference. You know, I can think of someone who for a period of time didn't turn up and easily could have been discounted or, you know, just, but when the team were interested and said, we want to walk with you, and they found out there were some significant things going on, they kept walking with this person.
Wonderful.
And the turnaround came, and that person, but that young people, if they think, well, they didn't even show interest in me. They didn't follow me up. They didn't care that I had stuff going on. They only wanted me to do the job.
That's that lack of authenticity.
You won't win them.
No, that's right. They're
we
looking
want to
for
win
more
people.
than that. Yeah. The people, who they are is more important than what they do in that development phase. You know, back to what you were saying there around having people in a role, giving them a basic role and having a go. You know, thinking, you know, giving them, whether we thinking about someone, you know, you give them a stage role, do an MC role or whatever, and you know, invariably it might not work brilliantly the first time, or you give them a team leader role on a Sunday, say I want you to head up the host team on the Sunday or whatever it might be, but being able to give them those clear guidelines beforehand. And then, you know, John, I think I might have said this on a previous podcast, but I use it all the time. John Kelly has always said, you know, when you're asking for feedback, say to them, what's 2 things you did well in one area you can improve. And I can honestly say that has been one of the most simple but most profound bits of advice for developing leaders I've ever had, because it does acknowledge them. It gives them a chance to acknowledge, but oftentimes they'll identify an area where they need to improve that you don't need to identify with them. You can just assert that and say, yeah, you're right, but let's work on that. But it's also kind of like, it's not all just you giving negative feedback. You're actually in a position to be able to, because most people will do 2 things well and 1 thing they need to improve.
Yeah, that's right. And I like that, strengths-based, strengths-focused.
Yeah.
But I think there needs to be in all of us, but and definitely with younger people, that willingness to work on themselves. If they are saying, well, no, I don't agree with you there, I thought I did a great job, and there's pushback and there's reluctance to be open to grow and to receive that feedback from you when you are intentionally developing a relationship with them as well, I think then that can be a little bit more of a challenge. So I think
I would go further and say that, you know, this will sound harsh, but it's a reality that if a person is not open to feedback, you can't work in the long term with that person. It's not tenable because you've got nothing. I feel like going, well, this is all I've got to offer you. If you don't think this is going to help you, I've got nothing else to offer. And I'm not here to be led by you. I'm here to support you and lead you, but you need to be willing to do it. And it's a breath of fresh air when you have a person. I don't agree with every bit of constructive feedback that I receive from my leaders either. So there are things where I go, okay, but I'm going to not push back. I want to be a person who doesn't push back. I want to be a person that says, thank you. I'm going to take that under advisement and think about it. And then say, is there anything else? You know, having that attitude is, if you're a young person listening to this, if you can have the, is there anything else attitude? If you can go, maybe my leader is old and maybe my leader is outdated and maybe they'll miss a few things. That's fine. I understand they might not understand what it's like to be a Gen Z, but I also realize they were young once too. So I'm going to benefit from listening to some of it and not dismiss it straight away. If we can have that attitude and then lean in and say, I want to learn. It's easy to let some of the stuff they might say that might not be right just pass you by because you're leaning in and wanting to learn. Yeah. The moment you push back on everything, there's no room for growth there. And as a leader, I have learned, because as a leader of people who've been like that of all generations, I have learned the hard way many times, and I'm sure we all have. There comes a point at which that's not sustainable. But if we're a people person, we generally believe in the best in people, we'll keep going and keep going and keep going. But eventually it gets to a point where you go, I just don't think this is sustainable. Oftentimes they'll vote with their feet or whatever and be upset. But we have to get comfortable with the fact that, in all honesty, we've done everything we can. We need to find the few people who maybe don't have the ability, because an available spirit, a leaning in spirit, a teachable spirit. You can teach ability. You can't teach that. That's sort of often there. You can instruct it and say, this is what's important. And I'm talking to you young people now. If you have that spirit, people who are older than you will snap you up like gold and they will invest into you.
Because I think it does need to be a level of respect. As while we respect them, they respect us. And you're right, we do need to be able to work together. And even certainly in Australia now with volunteering, or we have in New South Wales as volunteers in church and in our charity. they are treated similarly to staff. So don't let that discourage. Don't let that make you think, I can't have any volunteers, because that's, there's all this responsibility around treating them like a staff member.
Thing.
But I think it's a good thing. But I think around that area of respect, it may come to a point where it's like, well, we mutually respect one another. However, there has to be this
isn't working. This relationship isn't working.
Yeah, an agreement that, look, this is probably not the best thing for you right now.
Yeah.
And that's part of, because we have to think about the vision of the whole organisation as well.
And that's hard in a small church when you're struggling to find people anyway. But I can honestly say from experience, it's worth making that call sooner rather than later. Not in a harsh way, but just an understanding that it's better to shut down that ministry or not do that thing than to keep trying to prop something up with someone who isn't willing to come to the party. Because what's happening all the while is that there are other good raw talent out there, young people, they might even be in high school, who you can just take a bit more of an approach to and go, I'm going to invest into these younger people who are really hungry to learn and grow. And the older I get, it might sound cynical, but I just feel like the older I get, the less patience I've got with spending time with people who don't want to be spent. Because when I do that, I'm discounting the beautiful people out there who are hungry to learn. So I've just got to find that. I mean, this is Jesus' principle. It sounds harsh, but Jesus said, don't throw your pearls before swine. And what he's really saying is, you've got pearls, you've got wisdom, you've got experience as a leader. You need to invest it the right way. And a pastor said to me many, many years ago, you've got all the time to invest and no time to waste. I think as a leader at any level of life, be thinking, who have I got in my world that may not have all the talent, but they're teachable. They're people who are willing to draw out of me, not just have me have to download it to them, but they draw out, they're hungry to learn. They're the people you're looking for. And if you've got one or two of those, you can change your church.
Yeah. All right, well, let's wrap up there.
All right, so next one we're going to talk more about
continue this theme a little bit more into who are we looking for?
Yeah, so who are we looking for? All right, we'll talk to you on the next episode, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ministry Matters podcast. Hey, if this podcast has been an encouragement to you, or you think it could be to others, we'd be so grateful if you'd share it with your friends on the socials. So before you head back into your day, if you could take a moment to like our Facebook and Instagram pages and share them with your friends, that would be awesome. You can find us by searching @Ministry Matters Podcast, all one word. And one last thing that just helps the podcast algorithm to work for us. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a minute to rate and review our podcast. Be sure to click that follow button wherever you listen to your podcasts, so every new episode will be loaded straight to your device. And for those of you watching on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you know when a new episode drops. All the links you need are in the show notes. So thanks so much for being with us today, and we look forward to talking to you in the next episode.